Dumb Gaming as well. It is Complexity Limit versus Big Dumb Gaming on Freehold.
And right away we're going to see whether they decide to pull big or whether they decide to pull dumb. That's Big Dumb Guild here.
Yeah.
Moving in with...
the name of the guild?
you had the Complexity Limit bit.
all right.
All right, we see Complexity Limit. Both teams actually here with massive pulls. Hyper in tremendous danger here, but they are getting that huge healing. Look at that massive way of the crane healing on the side of BDG. Complexity Limit hasn't seemed to need it, though, as their players are just taking a little bit less damage. I think they've pulled a little bit less here, though. I think that BDG has grabbed a little bit more of the dungeon than Complexity Limit has.
I think they're very close right now, but yeah, you're right. BDG ended up getting a bit more, had a lot more to heal as well, and while it seemed like
it's the same
Complexity
amount.
Limit just... Oh, okay.
Complexity Limit just somehow didn't take huge damage from the same stuff that BDG did, but it didn't matter because that huge way of the crane healing was able to sustain them through it, as both are now onto that first boss. And we do see a difference in composition here. We have the double Death Knight on the side of BDG compared to Complexity Limit, opting instead to field a Hunter in place of that second Death Knight. So they're playing a little bit less of that kind of all-in, big pull composition. I think that means that BDG might have the potential here for a faster time.
They certainly have the potential. I mean, we saw kind of like the flip-flop between this as Method NA ran the double Unholy, whereas we saw Fly Me Out run with just the single one. So it does make me very curious to look at where they're going to start making adjustments in their routes to sort of compensate for that as well. We're already seeing how nice it is that you're going to be able to have a Hunter dropping any of the guano off to the side. We're seeing, Beyblade on the side of BDG, right?
BDG gets the poop directly into the melee, and that is going to cost Jaha's cheat. That is a resource. Man, they're getting a lot of these poops mastery Hunter if you have just the all melee composition like BDG does.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if they're already getting guano in melee, they might as well just have Beyblade get in there and start adding some extra damage, because it's so significant looking at, the boss damage and healer DPS as well. There's 20k difference between healer DPS at this point, maybe even more, as Complexity Limit's just killing the boss, and that's something you just hate to see. I mean, when the bait's going wrong, when you're having any of those combos of the guano dropping into a powder shot on your allies, it's just so rough.
Yeah, this is a boss that can look really, really easy if the baiting is done well and if all the mechanics are done properly, and otherwise it can take quite a bit of extra time, as we do see happening to Big Dumb Gaming there.
That's right. Well, both teams are getting the boss down and moving on throughout. What we saw last time was everybody drinking, and Complexity Limit's doing the same thing. They're activating the boss as we speak. So there's no Eudora. She's going to be one of the friendly captains this week, so everybody's getting into position right now, and I was always kind of curious to see if any of the Hunters would start staying up on top of that house, as it make it a little bit easier to bait any of the blades, but we're instead using the Hunter to grab all of the trash together, probably to be expecting Max to start running into the Council of Captains, as we saw out of the side of Method NA earlier today.
Yeah, they want to make sure that they get all these mobs together for a little bit first, build up those Death Knight wounds on them, let the Death Knight set up their combo, and you see Fired Up now drops the Death and Decay and is going to be shooting up those damage meters. 1.5 million.
Oh,
we're going to see 2 million.
7.
No, not quite going to get up there. Yeah, there's that plateau. Reasonable amount of burst there, but actually Eric doing huge AoE as well on the side of Complexity Limit. That's on that Beast Mastery Hunter. Meanwhile, BDG on the same pull here.
Did we see Atrocity run ahead to activate the Ring of Booty?
Yeah,
okay.
He did that at the end of the of Skycap and Crag. He was doing that.
He was already running ahead first.
That's part of the reason that we're seeing rogues so often in Freehold, is because they have the ability to just vanish at 20% on Skycap and Crag and go on a little stealth mission.
Yeah, Beyblade went on a little stealth mission to the Shadowlands as he went down. They get the res out onto him and continue on with the boss, but good recovery there. I mean, they're kind of like chip deaths here and there, where it costs you a little bit of time, but the pull continues and nobody else was at threat of dying because all of the trash was already dead. So glad to have those DKs available, but ooh, some greedy play. I guess it was Captain Raul's Keg Smash went down for like one tick and then it immediately got stunned.
Oof. That is, yeah, usually it's predictable when it is going to get stunned, but sometimes, especially if those haste brews can get involved, things can get a little bit weird.
Alright, Complexity Limit's done with the pull. Again, widening their lead over BDG, as BDG's hanging in there right now, despite, a little bit of mistakes early on, and at this point, I'm just wanting to look at how they're getting themselves together for this next one, as it looks like they're probably going to be grabbing a ton of mobs in together. And have to see if they can get Lightning taken care of quickly enough so they can activate Ludwig.
Yeah, the Ring of Peace goes down. They're all going to meld inside the Ring of Booty here. And looks like Lightning was already done there.
Okay.
Atrocity must have snuck ahead and done it, yeah. Again, the value of that rogue, and they're now going to do another huge Death Knight pull into Ludwig here.
Yeah, time to watch the Harpooners as we have to deal with the Crusher and Ludwig. Turtle shells flying all over the place. And right there's the Harpoon. Oh, he's right out of it. Perfect.
Excellent,
That's what I wanted to see, is just like having the Hunter running out so he can bait some of the Harpoon casts, making sure that he's able to get out of them quickly, or just Turtle if need be to start avoiding some of that extra damage, because you get Harpooned into a Crusher. Atrocity's dropping low. He didn't proc cheat, though. Very well played on the side of Complexity Limit. You'd love to see it.
BDG now going to be attempting much the same pull, it looks like, maybe minus a Crusher. They're going to tank for a little bit here first, and now in comes Ludwig. And we have 2 Death Knights on the side of BDG, so we may see a little bit more damage exploding out of them. Although there's it's kind of like there's a limited amount of fuel for these Death Knights, so the second one brings a little bit less than the first one does.
Yeah.
And that, I think, ends up being part of the reason that teams are able to succeed with 1 Death Knight in this dungeon just as well as 2.
We've seen that a number of times. I mean, I don't think that pull on the side of BDG was as big as Limits. I certainly was not as big as we saw out of Method NA earlier on. So I think that's part of the issue as well, is if you're not constantly fueling them, then it's just not going to be as efficient, not as worthwhile to really take advantage of double unholies.
Right, yeah, double unholy feels like you need to be doing pulls that are so massive and, you know, have so much health that you're going to actually still benefit from that second one.
Yeah, and it really seems that Complexity Limit's able to get such quick work onto the mobs. Like, they're gathering all these mobs in together, and I'm wondering just how much they're holding on to cooldowns and how much they're holding on to damage as they're waiting for Trothak to spawn. I mean, it's these little things that count, not so much against, you know, the 7th seed when it's 2nd versus 7th, but more so when we're thinking about how a Method NA matchup might look, making sure every second you're doing something valuable. Having that bit of extra downtime is a little bit weird.
Yeah, you know, if we want to compare against Method NA's earlier run, they were able to execute a 12-minute and 58-second freehold. So Complexity Limit have that as the thing that they're up against. I think that they're maybe on pace for that at this point.
Yeah, I'm interested to look at this point, I think they're going to have to take 1 obelisk if they're going to be following a similar strat that Method NA had. Because Method NA dealt with 3 obelisks plus all of the trash surrounding Harlan's suite on his platform there. So they're around the same trash percentage, but it's a lot of extra time to deal with just 1 obelisk mob, even though they did take it, even though they did deal with it pretty quickly.
Yeah, and in the first America's Cup, we saw Twisted doing quite a lot of awakened mob kiting, so they may opt for that kind of strategy. The problem with that in Freehold, though, is that you lose the ability to cannon barrage down a bunch of extra trash, and I think that is going to prove to be far more time efficient than doing the obelisk kiting strategy. However, Complexity Limit could choose to just fight 4 obelisks with the last boss. That would probably save some time compared to Method NA's strategy.
It would. Although we also saw all of the trash on Harlan Suite's platform getting pulled with those 3 obelisks, so I guess they would still just try to force the issue and try to bring 4 obelisks in with all of the trash mobs. That would certainly be faster, but
you could do the obelisks first and then pull the trash. Like there's time later in the boss fight to pull all that trash, and you get more cannon barrages later anyways.
All right, well, they're grabbing the next Crusher.
This is a lot of trash here, actually. This is probably more than they needed. I think that this means they might actually be looking to do the kite, because this is a lot of the trash that impedes the kiting path that is all going to be taken care of here.
They're clearing the road right now. Complexity Limit, grabbing everything in together. I'm fired up, getting to the top of the charts. No surprise on that one, and great control as well. You know, having to watch out for so many of these mobs and just making very quick work of that Crusher. Usually that thing is up forever.
Yeah, I'm fired up, bringing out the Zamboni, clearing the skating rink here for Twisted's potential later ice skating journey. Although actually there are still quite a few mobs back there that were in the normal path, so we might not actually see that coming out of that. That might have just been an efficient trash pull from Complexity Limit.
Maybe. I mean, they would have to clear this area out as well if they want to take advantage of the kiting. I mean, yep, there's the Transcend we just saw being placed down onto the bridge.
Okay, yep, so we are going to see it.
Yep, so Twisted's getting himself set up to be running for his very life. as we speak, and big to watch that dampen harm CD. Fort Bruce coming back in like 30 seconds or so. So he needs to make sure he's got both of them up, ready, cocoons ready as well, because he needs to survive like a couple hits from these mobs before he's going to be able to start kiting.
Atrocity on a stealth mission to get the last 6% from a Ravager over there. Mission successful. Vanishes and shrouds to bring the rest of the team to Harlan, and we are going to see an obelisk kite out of complexity limit. 10 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock now. If they can kill Harlan here in the next 2 minutes, they're going to have a faster time than Method NA. Unfortunately, that is not going to happen, as Twisted has... Something has gone wrong in the shroud skip for complexity limit.
I think we saw Twisted... Yeah, I'm pretty sure he ended up pulling threat there. Maybe he's going to have to invis, or he's able to jump up. Okay, he's jumped up, he's in position, they rebuffed him, he's got all of his defensives right now. A bit of extra time spent onto that one, but all eyes got to be on Twisted right now, as he has the most important job to grab all of these obelisks together and really just make sure he survives.
Yeah, the rest of the team over on the far side of the platform. Atrocity getting in position now. He will be using Tricks of the Trade on Twisted to redirect the threat from those awakened enemies. Especially these ones that are close to max here.
I like that they're waiting on cooldowns right now. It may look like it's just time inefficient, and it very much is, but they're making sure they're going to be consistent on this one, because at this point, they don't want to make any sort of mistakes. It's all going to be on how well they're able to execute. Twisted popping all of his defensives right now, as we're going to start seeing him transcend and go on the run, as all ought to be on how well they're able to execute. Twisted popping all of his defensives right now, as we're going to start seeing him transcend and go on the run, as all eyes should be on him, as we'll be able to look at how well he'll be able to survive and kite away any of these obelisk mobs.
Yeah, there he goes,
He's
running across the bridge, and those volcanoes behind him. Much can kill him here in the space of 1 second if things go badly. So he has to be very careful to keep these mobs in good position.
Oh, he does get a cast on him.
Yeah, the Lingering Doubt cast, not actually the one that's too dangerous with this strategy. It's the other one, the slowing one, that will then require a dispel that is required for the fear.
Yeah, I was going to say, but he can dispel the slow, and he can Tiger's Lust it, and he can also just raw dispel it. So I think the big problem is he has to make sure that he's staying in range of the Tank Buster here, because without that...
Yeah, if he gets too far away from that Tank Buster, weird stuff may happen. So they have to be careful to avoid having that happen. Meanwhile, the rest of the group fighting Harlan, they just have to keep doing it until... Yeah, well, Twisted just has to keep kiting for a little bit. There's going to be his Sky Step. That's his combat potion. So you'll have no more access to those. But you can see he's got everything now pretty nice and grouped up. As he continues, he's found a way, they found actually a great way to execute this without clearing as much of the trash as Perplexed needed to in order to get that raceway cleared.
Yeah, I love the speed pot that we've seen so far. I was curious if he was going to reuse the Transcend. Watching for him to go to the stage here and drop a big Transcend, and we just missed it. No, observers, I wanted to see the Transcend. He does take a big hit there. Probably another one of the casts going off onto him.
Oh no, Fired Up! Fired Up gets feared down to 6% health as Samrek has moved back to... Samrek has snapped back to the rest of the team, and that's going to kill Fired Up. Max now at 10%. Samrek hits really, really hard. Max is out of defensives. Max is going to go down. That's going to be Atrocity down. Eric 5%. As well. 5% on Harlan. Eric going to try and solo here. Might actually be able to do this. Gonna revive Pet so that he can do some damage.
Oh, he's gonna tank again. He's gonna Pet the tank for him
Harlan.
again.
Harlan.
Harlan's not fooled. Oh no, the full wipe comes out on the side of complexity limit right now. An absolute disaster as BDG is at 28% on Harlan Suite with 4% trash remaining. They held in long enough to start sweeping away the win.
And this is just a classic complexity limit. You know, big pull that leads to a big wipe. We saw even Method NA having a more conservative strategy than them on that last boss, and you know, these risks, sometimes they can pay off and lead to a faster time, but other times like this, it's gonna lead to them losing a map against Big Dumb Gaming, which is not something that they wanted to happen here in this first map of the series.
It certainly is not, and that's how it always seems to go, is that if you make that pull successfully, you're a hero, you're a genius, you know, everybody wants to be able to copy your strats and watch your strats, but if it fails, you know, that's all she wrote.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate on the side of complexity limit, and that's going to make Big Dumb Gaming the winner of this first game here. putting complexity limit only one loss away from getting sent down to that lower bracket. And I mean, Dranos, you touched on it quite a bit. Like it doesn't seem worth it to do that kiting of the awakened mobs strategy because of situations like this. I mean, how would they have done Zyro if they didn't do that and played something more conservative like we saw Method NA do on Freehold?
I think the reasoning behind this is pretty simple, right? If you aren't confident in your strategy and you don't run it all the time, why are you doing it? You're committed to a certain strategy regardless of the team you play off again, because if you're not confident in being able to pull it off every single time, then you shouldn't be doing that strategy. So clearly they're confident and they have enough of a success rate doing it that it's something that they're comfortable doing in tournament play. But unfortunately, sometimes, things can go wrong. We even saw Complexity Limit doing a different variation there, where they actually pulled trash on top of the final boss as well without a healer, which is already dangerous by itself. And maybe adding that extra trash in made it so the boss died slower than normal, so that Twisted didn't have as much of a kite pattern, and we saw Senrek, the fear guy, teleport or snap back to the boss because of that. And once there's extra damage and take up on the platform, that's going to cause the wipe. So unfortunate to see from them, but of course it is only the first game of the series. We do have 2 more games here. So it's not over yet for Complexity Limit in this first match.
Yeah, and I think you were saying, Dranos, also that if they pulled off that pull, they would have had the fastest freehold time. Is that what you said?
It looked like it to me. It looked like they were on pace to beat Method NA's 13-minute freehold by maybe 20, 30 seconds. Yep. That being said, the Method NA strategy looked like there were a lot fewer points of failure there. Method NA's last boss was 3 awakened enemies, which is not something that's too likely to go horrifically wrong. So I liked it, though. I liked Complexity Limit strategy. They need to be able to get these things more reliable, because this is not the first time we've seen something like this go wrong for them on the last boss.
Well, and I think the comparison that I was trying to make, but I wasn't doing it very eloquently, is like for Complexity Limit, they want to compete against Method NA, and in their minds, it's like, okay, what do we need to do to beat that team? And let's practice it against Big Dumb Gaming, and it just didn't work out this time around.
Yeah, but I think that also goes to show how confident you also have to be, not only in that dungeon with that specific strategy, but also in the entirety of the series. What are the games that you're expecting to play? We got Dagor coming up next, for example, right? How are they expecting to say, okay, we can challenge ourselves, we can make sure that we're playing, our Method NA strats, our top tier strats, whatever it is, not try to, pull out any stops for anybody else, and then if it doesn't work out, we have other games that we're able to come back in.
That being said, Dagor might not be a strong point for Complexity Limit. They were number 2 in both the other time trial dungeons, but Dagor, they were the 5th place time there with a much slower run. So I think that
they
is
were
scary.
They were, but they were a minute faster than their opponents.
That is true. Yes, they still have a favorable rating against Big Dumb Gaming there, but this is still a spooky dungeon for Complexity Limit, I'd say, and they're very much in danger of going down to this lower bracket here. If Dagor, if a couple things go wrong for them in this run again, especially if Big Dumb Gaming can put up another consistent, even if slightly slower maximum speed run like we just saw them do in Freehold, that is really going to hold Complexity Limit to a 0 mistake run for victory.
Well, a little bit of insider information. Yes, I am a member of Complexity Limit.
Leaks?
Unbelievable.
What?
But I am aware of the fact that their best Dagor time in time trials. Let me give you an accurate rendition of what happened in that time trial. Atrocity. I'm Atrocity in the cannon. All right, guys, shooting final shot. And they don't hear from him for 3 more minutes. Internet offline. So yeah, they have a 20-minute Dagor time and time trials, but they had a player DC for like 3 minutes in that key as well. So
I don't know. I mean, you get 5 time trial attempts though.
True, that was their final attempt.
Complexity Limit, I think, they have a bit of a history of putting up these really impressive times either in time trials or in practice runs. But the conversion to actual tournament play is something that we have yet to see from them reliably.
I think that's also playing together in a tournament environment. I mean, you can practice as much as you want, but no matter how well you practice, nothing really compares to game day.
Right.
No, and like we just saw in that last game, consistency was rewarded. Big Dumb Gaming, they were, they did the safer strategy. They downed some of those obelisks before they got to the final boss, and it ended up paying off for them. And you know, if Complexity Limit does something like that again in the next game here, coming on to Toldagor, Big Dumb Gaming may just go forward and be the ones to face Method NA. No, they're not going to face Method NA, but move forward in the bracket.
It's possible, sure, but I think it's always important to look at like the history of MDI, though. We've seen countless times where these teams that are Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, that are amazing teams at whenever they look successful, but then when they fail, they just look, you know, like a bunch of clowns or something like that. Shell's Angels back in Legion was very well known for that, having these hyper-aggressive pulls that every single time they just needed to have small iterations to make sure it was consistent when they were able to do it, and that led to their win. You know, I 100% am behind these hyper-aggressive strategies to make sure that you're competing with number one, no matter if you're matching up against them or not.
Yeah, and then if they weren't doing it, you know, against Big Dumb Gaming in this series, like, or if they are doing this, since they're doing it, like, clearly they've pulled it off enough times, like you were saying, Zyro, to be confident that they would be able to pull it off again. And honestly, like you're saying, Jack, I would love to see them do that strategy again on Freehold and pull it off. It would be definitely cool to see. But yeah, correcting myself, the winner of this series goes on to face Ethical and not Method NA, and I believe Ethical actually beat Complexity Limit 2-1 in the last cup, so whoever wins the series is definitely going up against a hard team as well. And yeah, Toldagor is, we're going to be moving on to that one next here in this game, and Drynos, that's a map, like we've talked about a little bit, that teams have struggled on. However, it seems like they're kind of getting a handle on that Sanguine affix. Is it just becoming more comfortable for them at this point?
I don't know if Sanguine Toldagor is ever something you can truly be comfortable in, but it is something that you get experience against, and yeah, you can get some idea of where the biggest problems are. You know, there are a lot of enemies in Toldagor that like to run away when they're low on health in these narrow corridors, and those are two recipes for massive disasters with Sanguine. But the comps that these teams are playing have a lot of tools to deal with those events, so as long as they're proactive and thinking ahead about what's going to happen when this mob starts to flee, where are we planning to drop our Sanguine, which areas do we need to be clear of Sanguine for our next pull, as long as that thought process continues for the entire duration of the dungeon run, I think that these teams will be able to put up some really impressive work here in Toldagor.
Yeah, definitely. It's exciting to see some of these maps get really perfected, especially with teams like Complexity Limit and Big Dumb Gaming. Zyro, what comps have we been seeing traditionally on Toldagor, and what about them makes it so good with these affixes on this map?
Well, I think the interesting variation that we've seen from time trial runs in this past week is that we're seeing a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunter in Toldagor, and this is obviously more up Dratnos' alley being a tank player himself, but Vengeance brings a lot more mob control in form of their Sigil of Chains, as well as Misery, as well being able to be used for the cannon shots, because the cannon shots don't actually break the fear effect, so they can just lock everything in place, fear everything, and then let the cannon take care of them. Now, of course, being Sanguine Toldagor, you need to make sure that the cannon kills all of them at pretty much the exact same time, otherwise the Sanguine healing can get out of control. But with the right amount of control, we should be able to see a team running a Vengeance Demon Hunter in this dungeon do a pretty clean job of dealing with that outside platform.
Yeah, the Chaos brand that they bring as well does amplify the damage that the cannons do. So that is another bonus to the Demon Hunter. That can help make sure that all the enemies reliably die on the same cannon shot, instead of having... Because in a normal week, it's not too bad if some die to the fourth cannon shot and some die to the fifth cannon shot. This week, that's going to be a huge problem because of the Sanguine being active. So the teams need to be really careful to make sure that everything dies to that same shot.
So is this trading off that Vengeance Demon Hunter for the Prot Warrior, is that like a worthwhile trade, would you say, Dratnos, or is it just a different strategy going into this?
Yeah, you know, it's pulling out more of a scalpel instead of a machine gun, but Toldagor is more of a surgery than anything else, so I think that a scalpel is exactly the right tool for this job.
Man, metaphors are on
Yeah.
point today, man.
The scalpels, the very fast engines, I've got them all. Yeah.
You gotta weave your way in between those triangles that have a lot of gaps in them in Toldagor.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. What's wrong with you guys?
Yikes. Alright, well, we are, if this goes to a Game 3 also, we can talk about that. Waycrest Manor, it's kind of similar to Toldagor, if it were to have Sanguine, but it is a pretty tight map. Do we think this is going to go to a game 3, Jack? And if so, what difficulties are we going to see on Waycrest?
100% goes to a game 3 on this one, and explosive, and just how high trash density that you're going to be pulling in. I mean, Waycrest Manor is kind of just a Mistweaver Monk's dream of how much trash density there is out there, and it's just going to be about control. Like, how aggressive can some of these teams be? You talk about having a scalpel when you're going through Dagor, for example. This one just needs a blunt force hammer and needs to be able to make sure people popping defensives when they need to, and you're able to just blast all the trash into oblivion as you're destroying bosses.
So do we think that since Complexity Limit, they're down 1 game, they only need 1 more loss, basically, to get sent down to the lower bracket? Obviously, that's not something they want. Do you think that they're going to maybe try and play a little bit more safe, Zyro? Or are we going to see some of those crazy strategies that Complexity Limit is sort of known for coming into this next map?
I can't really think of anything crazy that you're going to be able to do in Dagor. I mean, most of the big pulls are already established, right? It's really gonna come down to how much trash percentage they're gonna be comfortable with pulling into the cannon.
I think of
really,
all the teams in this tournament, Complexity Limit is the least likely one to scale down their pulls. I think that they are very, self-confident, and they believe they can execute it, so they're gonna do their route. They're not gonna, try and they're not gonna be in that mind game. They're just gonna be playing the video game.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, we are going to go to a quick break before we see Complexity Limit face off against Big Dumb Gaming in Dagor. It is 1-0. Big Dumb Gaming is only 1 win away from sending Complexity Limit down to the lower bracket, and we will see that next game coming up right after this break. Welcome back, everyone. We saw Big Dumb Gaming win against Complexity Limit on that Freehold, and now we are looking at Dagor and Complexity Limit are gonna have to tie it up on this next game, Dratnos. Otherwise, they're gonna get sent down to the lower bracket. We talked about it before we came off to the break. Are they gonna try and do something a little bit more aggressive on this map here, or are they gonna maybe try and scale back a little bit so that we don't have a repeat of that Freehold map, do you think?
Yeah, Dagor is just an inherently aggressive dungeon. You know, the cannon pulls by its very nature. There's kind of no realistic way to slow that down. So I think that there's no way to play this dungeon in a way that, you know, doesn't require clean execution and difficult pulls in order to be competitive. So I think absolutely we're going to see that out of both teams.
And also mention again Sanguine and Volcanic, and we talked a little bit about the comps. There are like a couple of different things that they're running. Zyro, do you want to maybe make a prediction for either of these teams what we're going to see play in terms of those DPS slots?
DPS slots is likely going to be what we saw them run on their time trial times, just probably the same thing as in Freehold, 1 DK, 1 Hunter, 1 Rogue, just a good combination of just solid single target DPS from the Hunter, burst AoE from the DK, and of course the Rogue is pretty important in this dungeon. They have a lot of utility things they do. They can open those cages on the second floor of the jail, giving access to double buffs for a lot of the players in the group, and on top of that, I think the important thing that they bring is they can Tricks of the Trade their tank with the cannon shot, so they don't have to worry about aggro issues. All of the aggro will go to their tank, so they're kind of the only class that can really do that. You can also do that with Misdirect on Hunters, but Rogues just bring so much extra utility throughout the dungeon that they're kind of a mainstay in Dagor.
Yeah, I think we're always going to see that Rogue in Dagor. Against Sanguine in particular as well. Hunter, the DK actually brings that Death Grip, which can be really useful for, you know, those enemies as they're running away. You just grip them back into the corner and they die over there instead of dropping the Sanguine in a weird spot or running into Sanguine as they start to flee. So good use of those grips against Sanguine can save a huge amount of time if it means the difference between a mob going from 10% to 0 versus 10% to 100% from the Sanguine pools.
Have we seen somebody run 2 Death Knights? Because then would it be? I mean, it would be. You'd have twice the amount of Death Grips. Obviously, would that be like a good strat for that?
Well, only one of our time trial teams ran double DK in time trials, and I believe that they aren't in our. They didn't actually make it to broadcast, so none of the broadcast teams are running double DK. And you would swap out the Hunter for the second DK more than likely in this particular comp. But I just think that the extra single target damage you get out of the Hunter is just too useful for the bosses in this dungeon, because there's one of the things you talk about with double DK, and the only time you really run double DK is when you can pull a certain amount of trash on top of bosses, and you really don't want to do that with Sanguine, especially in the boss arenas that we have in this dungeon, which are usually in tight corridors. It's really hard to maneuver around Sanguine, so unlikely that double DK is going to be nearly as competitive as the Hunter.
That's why I play Demon Hunter, and I can just glide over all of it.
Just be good for everything.
Yeah. But let's talk about the obelisks. How do we think that they're going to manage it here? We saw that really aggressive strat, obviously, with Freehold, with Complexity Limit, trying to save those all 4 till the last boss, and then Big Dumb Gaming was dealing with them a little bit differently as well. What are we going to see here on Dagor, Jack?
I think we've usually looked at, mostly 2, maybe 3 obelisks max. You can't really run around with like the Tank Buster, for example, because you just can't move around that much throughout just the last boss and Overseer Korgus. Your movement's so heavily restricted. So I'm not anticipating too many of the obelisks going into the last boss, especially because there's a lot of really useful skips that can also start coming in when you have to deal with Dagor.
Yeah, that's true, and it's something that I don't think we've like explicitly stated today, at least. Like, if you do use those obelisks, save those obelisks for the last boss, you're losing a lot of like routing skips that you can do, obviously. And in a map like Dagor, that could make a really big difference for you, Dranos.
Yeah, you know, the dungeon is there's so much that you want to avoid pulling in here. Excuse me. So the obelisks are really useful to do that, which means that if you save them for the last boss, you know, you do get the benefit of not having to fight their armies in Azoth. You do get that extra time of cleaving them down, but you lose the benefit of that skip, and that is a really big benefit to give up on.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see here soon what they decide to do on Dagor. The game is ready, and it is Big Dumb Gaming versus Complexity Limit.
Ooh, looks like we may have actually had a false start
I think
there.
that's a false start.
Hey, just kidding, just kidding. Well, we're going to give those guys a little bit of a second to get their team sort of reformed. Takes a little bit when that happens, but it does happen every once in a while.
Only smiles in chat.
That's right. Only smiles.
Only smiles in chat. But, yeah.
Or
well,
elbow cuffs are good too.
Whichever you want to do.
Yeah, you know, gotta be safe.
But, we can talk about their comps as we did see them. We are seeing Max on that Vengeance Demon Hunter, and Big Dumb Gaming is running that Warrior. And then as far as DPS and healers, they are running the exact same thing. Drinos, I asked you this kind of the same question earlier, but I'm going to ask it again in terms of these teams. We're seeing basically the same comp except for the tank here. DPS wise, what do you think has the most advantages for this?
So I think that do you mean the difference between the two tanks for DPS, or do you mean
Basically, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Or
so,
however you want to, whatever you're
I'll interpret the question that way.
Yeah.
Which of these two tanks is going to do more damage? I think that it's going to be the Vengeance Demon Hunter when you factor in all of the extra damage that Chaos Brand brings for all their magic damage and the cannon shots, and when you factor in all the Sanguine healing it avoids. In terms of raw damage, factor in all of the extra damage that Chaos Brand brings for all their magic damage and the cannon shots, and when you factor in all the Sanguine healing it avoids. In terms of raw damage numbers, I expect to see the Prot Warrior looking a lot better on that, but the utility is going to translate to a huge amount of extra damage from the Vengeance Demon Hunter.
Definitely. Well, we are in the game this time. It looks like it was a good start, and Big Dumb Gaming versus Complexity Limit 1-0.
All right, here we go as the mass mobs of crabs are coming in. All of them being pulled in the entirety of the beach going into the boss right now as both Complexity Limit and BDG are encountering the Sanguine. Actually, no, not yet Sanguine.
Yeah, Complexity
they're
taking a little bit of time there, setting up their wounds.
Okay.
And this is going to be a good thing to make sure that they just get their full AoE damage combo here.
That's right,
And
and there's fired up. 3 million
spikes on the damage
damage.
meter. Max
my
has, I
goodness.
believe he has that AoE taunt essence to make sure that he can hold threat against this, because it is not an easy thing to do as a Vengeance Demon Hunter to reliably hold threat. But yeah, he did use that Strength of the Warden Major in order to make sure that that was well handled. And look at that beautiful Sanguine management as well.
Oh my goodness, that was incredibly clean. I like how they did that, and you know, at this point, even though they pulled a little bit later than we saw at a BDG, they are almost caught up in boss damage right now as Atrocity does end up hitting the sand trap. Oh, got to be very careful there, but they do end up topping him off, and not too much mana expenditure by either of the healers there, so very well played, as this fight can be a little bit grueling, but thankfully, having the soothe effect from the hunters will be very, very helpful if they end up switching pets.
Yeah, Max here, fairly low on the overall damage meters. He is playing a pretty single target intensive corruption setup. He's got some gushing wounds going on. So that is going to mean that the Sand Queen is going to take quite a bit of extra damage from him, but he's not going to do a huge amount of AoE damage.
I guess it's okay, though.
Yeah, that's the thing, is the AoE damage is done by Fired Up, right? Like,
yeah.
Doing a little bit extra AoE damage, Fired Up is gonna kill those things anyways. So I think that I like that decision from Complexity Limit here.
Those are always the moments I love to see, is when these teams are working on, okay, I'm not going to do the top damage on this, but that doesn't mean I'm not contributing the most in my own way, right? You say, okay, this guy is going to be able to do a lot of the extra overall damage, a lot of the chip overall damage, so like the crabs and the other little garbage mobs that aren't really that impactful. But you're in a Tyrannical 19, I'm going to make sure I optimize for more single target. We saw it a lot of times out of Mistweavers as well, making sure they were having that extra gushing wounds, that extra priority target damage, and
Complexity Limit actually beat the third upheaval there.
They pulled slower, killed it earlier.
They beat the third upheaval, and they are skipping this first obelisk. So that is one that will be fought with the last enemy. That is fairly standard. That's Voidweaver Malthier there, the interrupt enemy. And they're now going to run through here, and presumably this is going to be a Shadow Meld skip. CC is going out on those enemies. Combat entered with them, but they will all be able to Night Elf Shadow Meld here. That is one thing that Vengeance Demon Hunters are in fact allowed to play, is that Night Elf. Really, really beneficial for the spec here, as those Shadow Meld skips are so powerful.
Only allowed to play Night Elf, in fact.
Yeah, on the Alliance side at least.
Alright, Complexity Limit pulling ahead and already in the middle of a trash pack, as we're seeing BDG working on a similar Shadow Meld skip coming up on this one, while Complexity Limit, again, I want to see this finesse, this scalpel-like surgical precision as we're having a lot of those looters going to be dying very soon. Sigil of
there's the
Chains
Sigil of
comes
Chains.
in, dropping everything incredibly low right into the Ring of Peace, and here's where we're going to get that quick kite. No slows going up onto those mobs as they're going to start running away. Great stun there by Atrocity to make sure that the Arsonist gets killed right next to the Striker. That is something that you just love to see.
Yeah, excellent play there from Complexity Limit. They are going to go and enter this obelisk now.
Watch BDGs here. We want to see how close BDG is going to be able to, because we already have a couple of the looters that are getting into the Sanguine. There's one
And
in
there's
the back
one full
getting
healing.
topped.
Yeah, that is a lot of extra health for them to deal with.
That's what I'm talking about. It looks so clean, it looks so easy to them, but the slightest hiccup in where these mobs are going is going to just burn in a little bit of extra time over and over and over again. So great play there by Complexity Limit. BDG didn't do a bad job, but
Comes out on those Mindrend tentacles from the Blood of the Corruptor, and Complexity Limit able to deal with all 4 of those without too much difficulty as they now advance into the Brig.
all right, and the Brig is going to be an incredibly dangerous area here as there's tons of trash mobs around, and I want to see the same thing that we just saw out of those looters, how well they're going to be able to stack up the Sanguine, especially when mobs have different levels of health.
Yeah, they're all going to be using the Nihilotha portal here to get back out. Out comes some crowd control.
There it is.
And what is going to be the first order of business here? So a bunch of crowd control on the packs in front of them. Looks like step 1 is going to be clearing these neutral enemies and dropping their Sanguine. Getting fairly close to
They're
the
gonna
wall here,
pull
and they're going to pull
yeah.
the boss. So here comes Jess Hallis. They pulled him through
right.
the wall.
They do still have a couple of the neutrals left. They got to make sure they get them away from the boss as we speak. But they are in prime position to start resetting a lot of those crowd controls, but that's a bad Sanguine right there.
Yeah, unfortunate flashing daggers timing coming from them as they are now, it looks like pulling... No, okay, they're not pulling anything extra. Oh yeah, they are.
Oh, they
There it
are.
goes.
Yeah, they're
Twisted,
starting to
pulling
grab
some
in more
trash.
mobs. So I guess they're just going to work on killing it, because Jess Hallis will run through that gate once again to start unlocking everything, won't he? So
Yes.
if they start killing everything behind, then I guess they'll be all right.
So they got 2 arsonists. They left the casters for now. And Volcanic spawning on everything, spawning on everybody during the stun is pretty brutal. Max drops really low. Does look like maybe pops the cheat death there.
Yes, he does. So he is able to survive thanks to that cheat death. But they do grab all the mobs into the corner. I assume that they're going to just try to kill them quickly, Ring of Peace them, Sigil of Chains into Ring of Peace back, so that way they don't have to worry about them. They do have a Binding going down, so they won't be able to ring. Binding shots a really strong cooldown, but it does last an incredibly long time. So you're going to have those
Jess
guys full
Hallis
healing. And
motivating,
just
crying in the pool. Back up
fully
to
topping.
87% health. That is not what Complexity Limit was looking for there.
Oh my goodness.
Still continuing with this boss fight. They're not in too much danger here. That just cost them a little bit of time. They do need to be very careful with the remaining Sanguine here. I think that the Ring of Peace remains available. So this last couple Sanguine drops, they might be able to mitigate with that.
Yeah, they do have a lot of mobs who
Sanguine
are
dropping.
dying right on top of Jess Hallis right now.
Yeah, it looks like Ring of Peace just not going to be used here. That makes
Okay,
sense.
'cause they
Ring of
had-
Peace is dangerous in this area.
It is.
And Death Grip is going to be the new way, actually. Fired a great Death Grip into the corner there for that last mob that's dying. And they are relatively free now. They should be in pretty good shape for the rest of this. They just have to deal with these tyrannical boss mechanics. Double line of sight needed here to line of sight both Bobby and Jess Hallis. Atrocity, unfortunately, gets hit by that flashing daggers cast. That's going to claim his cheat death.
It looks like they're going to be getting themselves stabilized, but still, this boss just seems to take forever at this point. I don't know about you, but I think we've had, 10-15% of Jess Hallis healed at this point. So right now they're working down Bobby as well alongside of it. And Twisted drops a little bit lower. I think they still have those casters to be dealing with in the back.
Yeah, BDG, meanwhile, also working on Jess Hallis. They are fighting it without trash. They cleared a little bit of trash first and brought that Sanguine back to a previous area. And they will now be fighting Jess Hallis with a tiny bit of extra trash. It looks like they're not even going to bother fighting trash during this intermission like Complexity Limit did.
Complexity Limit clearing out Jess Hallis at this point, and thankfully they had a lot of the loot.
They're fighting trash during this intermission like Complexity Limit did.
Complexity Limit clearing out Jess Hallis at this point, and thankfully they had a lot of the looters that were getting locked out of the cages at that point. All they really had to do was just kill them on top of the boss because they don't drop any Sanguine if Jess is the one who breaks them out of prison. So Complexity Limit...
Their side, that should still be okay for them.
Yeah, okay.
And they're going to shroud through now And Max is waiting here so that he will then be able to pull. So he's going to bring a bunch of enemies out to the cannon area from here. There goes the Lightfoot. Throws some glaives. Runs into a room. Ooh, runs right back out.
Hey, he's got to watch out. All right, he's grabbing all the casters in together. Starts working on the officers. Got to watch for those handcuff kicks as well, as that can quickly shut down this pull. Does a great job making sure he's grabbing everything in place. He's in prime position to start line of sighting any of the casts. And right here, he's just able to lay down damage, line of sight, get everything in together. Sigil of Silence is going down. Everything's going to be grouped up together, and now we're just going to have to wait for the Sigil of Chains as we're working on getting
one of those flame casters not really respecting the Ring of Peace there.
Oh, they never do.
There's the chains, though. The chains, the binding.
Everything is coming up right here. We're actually starting to have the binding shot effects going down right now, so you got to make sure he's hitting it dead center, not hitting any of the cannon shots against the wall. Here comes fourth shot. They do have one
and the
still
grip
alive,
on
and
the
there's
officer.
the grip.
Beautiful death grip from Fired Up, and the final cannon shot is going to execute those last two enemies. And with that pull, complexity limit have moved well ahead in this dungeon.
They have really solidified a very strong lead at this point. So I love the setup. I love this extra time to make sure they're getting everything done perfectly. Because even though that mob did end up running through that Ring of Peace, everybody switched targets, brought it down swiftly so that that final cannon shot could be used to bring it down. So very well played by Complexity Limit as Max Bad Boy is getting ready for round number 2 with the cannons.
Yeah, and they are going to go
right
and grab...
BDG.
Oh, there's the Seagull again on the side of Complexity Limit Seagull cam.
Yep, but BDG's dropping really low. Jess House is about to die, but they lost the tank. They lost Hyper. They do squeeze by on Jez Howless, but again, more time added to the clock and more struggles for them as they're working to get back into a position that they could potentially capitalize on any Limit's mistake.
Yeah, they're going to need Limit to have something go very wrong at this point.
Another Sigil of Chains coming out. Cannon fire
Does
begins.
miss one of the officers, actually 2 of the officers. Yeah, they're just going to kill those officers the old-fashioned way and cannon down the rest of the pool. Officer, though, running in. It's going to be Sigil of Misery. And the Death Grip, good Death Grip from Fired Up again. Those Death Grips have been very on point for the side of Complexity Limit.
Yeah, Fired Up has been absolutely sniping these quick grips, and I like that they made sure they dedicated another cannon shot to the officer that was still standing in Sanguine after his other allies died. Making sure that you're killing any of those things before it takes too long is great to see. They do end up going into the Tank Buster Obelisk, like I mentioned before the round, so very tight and closed area on Korgus, so they want to make sure they get this out of the way quickly.
Yeah, meanwhile, BDG are fighting the Fear Guy right now, so different set of awakened enemies coming out for these two teams. Fear Guy does go down, and BDG now have the Tank Buster and the Spider remaining, whereas Complexity Limit are going to have the Fear Guy and the Spider remaining for their last boss. Cynic
That's right.
on the side of BDG. Gonna do a similar pull here. It looks like slightly smaller than what Max did on the side of Complexity Limit. They don't have access to those Demon Hunter sigils, but they do still have quite a bit of mob control with the binding shots and the Ring of Peace and the shockwaves and such.
They really do. So they get the binding down, and he immediately intervenes onto Hyper, so that way they'll be able to line up all these cannon shots. So all eyes on Jaha to see how strong his aim really is. As Complexity Limit's moving on to Valyri.
Yeah, Knight Captain Valerie now for Complexity Limit. This is one that... Again, we're seeing. So if you look at the damage numbers, you know, Max.
Oh, they have a cannon going off.
Oh,
BDG's got a cannon going off. Cynic is dropping very low. All those mobs are just bathing in Sanguine as we speak. Oh my goodness! If anything more could be going wrong. Oh no, Dratno says they have some of the officers behind them. If they move back too much, another cannon went out. They're gonna have to move forward into those Marines. We still have more of these officers just bathing in Sanguine, and at this point,
blood and fire everywhere.
Ooh.
BDG.
Whose job was it to move the cannons, Dranos? Was it yours?
Those little barrels on the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are, that was my job. I messed up, I forgot, I'm sorry.
Too busy battle resing everybody.
Yeah. So, BDG are going to be able to finish this off, but it is going to take a little bit longer for them than it did for Complexity Limit, and that is still not a disastrous cannon pull for them. You know, it took a little bit of extra time, but they didn't wipe, and that's what's important.
Yeah, although when we're looking at how we compare any of these runs to different teams, you have to look at how much time is being burned, how much time is being wasted, and it's a little bit of a disaster on its own. Them still having to take an extra minute or so to kill all of those mobs normally, and they have to start, you know, again, eating up more time, more cooldowns, more resources to be able to grab everything together. We're really seeing why a lot of people were running with that Vengeance Demon Hunter, because that extra utility, that extra bit of crowd control is ridiculously powerful.
Yeah, we saw it in Season 1. Oh my goodness, on the side of Complexity Limit, that barrel is going to explode on everybody. They do have some defensive to survive. Oh, Maxon fired up, though! Get shot down by Valerie. Boss is at 16% health, but they lost their good battle res as well. 15% now, as the boss is going to start meleeing people. Parry coming out from Atrocity, and Max is going to be rezzed. But the barrels are now going wild.
Yeah, at this point, the cannons are just chaining into each other over and over again, but it looks like they will be able to stabilize, so... Good
Very
job
close. Ooh,
covering
the Venn
onto that
diagram
one,
here
but
of those barrels.
I don't think they even have a spot to be able to stand right now.
Atrocity 1% does survive, though.
Ooh.
And they're able to finish off the boss before it finishes them off, but that was close.
That was way too close onto that one. Always help your healers with the barrels, guys. Come on.
What do you mean? That's a healer job.
Ah.
Blame for that.
I
rest solely with Twisted.
Yeah, I actually had a tank who took care of all the barrels for me yesterday. It was a dream. I've never had that before.
Kind of weird.
And his name was Tettles.
Oh, did you just think he was a tank from looking at the damage meters?
Yeah. Oh, too soon. He's not even here right now. Start talking smack on him more.
That's the best time. He can't defend himself.
Flexi Limit wrapping up the last bit of trash. That was a tongue twister if I ever heard one. And they just need to be able to kill these last two obelisks as they go into Overseer Korgus. And they are going to be pulling the boss right onto these obelisks because it's just so much easier at that point. Usually you see everybody going into the corner in the top left, but right here, they're already on top of the obelisks. They just need to have that quick jump by Max. He's going to go from one side to the other. And again, I love the body pulls. We've kind of talked about like the theory of getting rid of any double effects out of Overseer Korgus, and body pulls onto the boss have always had great success with my groups.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that sometimes this boss gets these nasty cast sequences of explosive bursts back to back, and it seems like he does them a little bit less if you body pull him instead of pulling him with an ability, but it's all kind of just speculation as well.
It's like pseudoscience.
Yeah,
right?
It's
it's like WoW pseudoscience.
It's everybody has their own little superstition for what you can do to make Overseer Korgus not cast as many of those doubles, as it does require a lot more healing when he does decide to do that. Looks like on the side of Complexity Limit, Fear Guy already going down. We've got some seagulls perched at the very top of the dungeon here.
I bet they're exhausted.
Well, it looks like they're just sitting there.
Well, yeah, they need to rest, all right?
Yeah, very high up, I guess. They had to fly to the very top of the dungeon.
Exactly.
That's quite a lot of work.
Grueling. I mean, look at the island. It's just in the middle of nowhere. Do you know it's actually closer to go Tol Dagor to Tol Barad than it is to go to Tol Dagor to Tiragard?
Can you actually fly to Tol Barad from
No,
Tol
you
Dagor?
can't, but using the map and a ruler, it's pretty close.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Yeah, in case you ever had the inclination to do that. I mean, you always had to be able to measure different continents and, spaces of land and body and water.
Does make sense, I suppose.
Come on, like, what are you talking about?
That is a question I ask myself all the time. Overseer Korgus for Complexity Limit. There are no remaining obstacles between them and victory at this point. They are going to tie up this series. We will be going to a Game 3. That Game 3 is going to decide which of these teams gets to challenge Ethical in the upper bracket, and which of them has to fall down to that lower bracket. It's a scary prospect for BDG, but the fact they were able to take that first game off Complexity Limit, I think they've still got to have a pretty favorable mindset here coming out of this map.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, thankfully Steven didn't really mess with anybody here in Tol Dagor, so very, very good that we saw, not really bad management out of Sanguine from either of the teams. It was just a little bit of extra time start stacking up. I mean, obviously we had the cannon failure on the side of BDG right here, but they didn't fall so far behind that they couldn't get back into it.
Yeah, BDG, they're going to be a boss or so behind here. They're going to be 2 minutes maybe behind. And actually, we are seeing Complexity Limit. They're going to beat their time trial time by a nice 2 minutes here. So good overperformance of that underwhelming time trial they had in Tol Dagor.
Yeah, and good leaks by Zyronic to kind of hint at what was to come, Expert foreshadowing.
Yeah, that's big leaks. There's the victory, though, for Complexity Limit.
Smile.
Did you say smile?
Smile. Smiley face.
Smiley face. We need Tuttles here with his smiley face whiteboard drawing.
Smile W.
Yeah, but anyways, that is going to tie the series up 1-1 in this complexity limit versus BDG series. And honestly, like, it seems like, okay, I want to give credit to Big Dumb Gaming. They had that little mess up there with the cannons. They still held it together, especially, in this map that we've seen a lot of teams face trouble with that Sanguine affix. And they are 1-1. They took a game off of limit, and coming into this as, like, sort of the underdog, I feel like they're doing pretty well against limit here. Is ironic.
Yeah, I mean, definitely credit to Big Dumb Gaming. Obviously, we're a little more preoccupied with talking with Complexity Limit because we think they can be, a big contender and team if they can have consistent runs. But Big Dumb Gaming is definitely putting up a fight here, and even putting up a consistent enough runs to take games off of Complexity Limit is pretty impressive when they're having mistakes. You have to put yourself within striking distance, right? You have to be able to pounce on mistakes that their team makes, and they're definitely good enough to do that. So they're not making it easy for Complexity Limit at all.
No, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dranos, but BDG seems like this team that has, like, a pretty good foundation, and really all they would need to do to get, like, a little bit more of edge is, like, do some of those bigger plays that we're seeing some of those teams like Method, NA, and Complexity Limit do.
Yeah, last weekend we saw them with a pretty disappointing... They were one of the first teams out of the tournament. They lost their first 2 matches, and they were just gone. I think that definitely the performance we've seen from them so far suggests a team that could make a deeper run into this tournament.
Yeah, no, I'd definitely love to see that from them. But that is going to be a victory for Complexity Limit, and I believe we are going to be moving on to Waycrest. And we talked a little bit about it before we went to break. And that's also a pretty tight dungeon. Luckily, they're not going to be facing up against Sanguine. They're going to do, it's going to be Fortified, Explosive, and Grievous. And again, this is a best-of-3 series. Either of these teams could take this home. Really, I feel like, okay, based on how that first game went, to be honest, in my opinion, Jack, I think it could go either way. What do you think?
I think I'm going to give a slight edge to... I think I will give an edge, actually, to Complexity Limit. We've seen how they've been able to grow, and when it comes specifically to dungeons that you can just smash with a hammer, like we saw out of Freehold, sans, their wipe, obviously, what they were on pace for, their theoretical highs are ridiculously high. And with a dungeon like Waycrest Manor, which is just going to be, making sure you have people on explosive orb duty, making sure that you're executing properly as you pull mobs into the boss, I think it's very confident in Complexity Limit really able to pull through on the Waycrest.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Explosive and Grievous are really affixes that are going to test individual play, and that is a huge strength for Complexity Limit. Their roster is just stacked with these players that... have the ability to make these split-second adjustments to those kinds of affixes. That is going to give them a huge edge, I think, and make them able to pull off bigger pulls than other teams could in this dungeon.
Is that one of the affix combos, like, these teams, we've talked a lot about, like, synergy and team synergy and how important it is to be playing together as a team, obviously, like, in practice and during tournament play. Teams like Method EU that have been succeeding and playing together as a team for a long time. And is Sanguine one of those affixes, Dratnos, that sort of highlights when a team maybe not be as coordinated as some of those other teams?
Yeah, so that was what we saw in Dagor, right? Sanguine is like a...
Affixes, Dratnos, that sort of highlights when a team maybe not be as coordinated as some of those other teams.
Yeah, so that was what we saw in Dagor, right? Sanguine is like it's an affix where we saw Fired Up's Death Grips coming in really big for the side of Complexity Limit. Explosive and Grievous are kind of two different sides of that coin. They're a bit of a different animal than Sanguine, because they're a little bit more about the players reacting quickly and identifying if that explosive is something that they need to kill or somebody else needs to kill, making sure that they actually can target all of them, which is not always easy in a given situation. And Grievous is about making split-second decisions about your health potion and about your defensives and about your healer being able to actually heal everybody up through that. So I would say that Sanguine is really something that the group all kind of manages together, whereas Explosive and Grievous are something that each player has a huge amount of individual power over.
Most definitely. And there were a couple of
The
points.
strengths of the Vengeance Demon Hunter are there, and we saw a lot of interesting uses throughout the dungeon. I heard Dratnos and Jack talking about it I think their uses of Sigil of Chains throughout the entire dungeon was pretty good and solid. We all know Toldagor has some slight issues with triangles, so whenever you're knocking things back in Toldagor, you want to make sure you're knocking them away from the walls, not towards the walls, and being able to Sigil of Chains everything together and then be able to ring a piece things away from walls in order to deal with Sanguine was pretty good usage of those knockback mechanics there. We saw it twice earlier on, a lot of times actually, early on in the dungeon, and then on Jess Hallis. Unfortunately on Jess Hallis, they got a little bit of Sanguine on top of the boss, so they had to instantly interrupt and move it out. Probably healed like 20%. But I think the highlight of the dungeon was the Sanguine management with the cannon, right? Like they did a really good job of making sure there was absolutely zero Sanguine healing at all there, and they had a good death grip out of the entire pack for the one mob that didn't actually end up going down to those cannon shots. All in all, I think it was a pretty clean run, and I think it could be faster if they didn't have Sanguine healing on bosses, but their usage of Vengeance Demon Hunter there kind of shows why people have been choosing that in Toldagor for time trials so far.
Can we infer from that then that, like, moving forward, a lot of these, we're going to be seeing the Vengeance Demon Hunter on that map, or is it just based on the affixes that we had with that map?
I really think it has to do with Sanguine in that dungeon. It's just kind of a pretty big necessity in order to make sure it works properly.
We even saw Vengeance Demon Hunter last weekend in the European Cup in a different Sanguine dungeon, in Sanguine Underrot from the boys, and I think that, yeah, it's much more of an affix pick than a map pick.
Yeah, for sure. And like we've said before, they're going to be moving on to Waycrest, and again, that's going to be explosive Grievous. And it seems to me like it might be a little bit less difficult. Of course, we're not seeing that Sanguine that we've really highlighted today. Yeah, what can we expect from this game, Jack?
I think this dungeon is just going to be how well can BDG stay in the hunt. Just like we saw at a Freehold, they were immediately able to capitalize off of a complexity limit failure, and I'm 100% expecting complexity limit to try to put together the most lightning route that we've seen yet for them. So high expectations for complexity limit. If BDG has practiced this the way that they should have, hopefully have, they should be able to stay in the hunt and be waiting if complexity limit makes any sort of mistake.
Well, we will soon find out who will come out on top in this tied-up series. It is 1-1 complexity limit versus Big Dumb Gaming.
All right, here we go. Both sides of the Heartsbane Triad are getting pulled as Boss is getting activated as well. Selena is up first. They got that healing reduction. We will be seeing a very large wave of the Crane coming out for the Mistweaver, but don't expect too much healing, really, since there is going to be that debuff. But they almost immediately push her to 40% as Malady gets activated as well. Malady. Whew. Words are hard, Dratnos. How's it going, buddy?
It's a very difficult challenge, yes. We can see on the side of Big Dumb Gaming a slightly smaller pull going on. They didn't get both sides of the room. They're on the same boss fight here, but they are also slower on the boss fight. So a smaller pull and less boss speed so far for BDG. Twisted, though, goes down on the side of Complexity Limit. That's going to be a quick, swift battle res. That one of the benefits of those Death Knights is that instant cast battle res that they have. Really allows you to save a pull, but we are now going to be moving back into Sister Selena's healing reduction aura. Twisted needs to quickly get everybody back up, and there is that aura.
I really like how Twisted's been managing his mana as well, and Beyblade's doing the same here too. It was well worth mentioning. But I think Twisted had a very tough situation where everybody was low from Briar and then went back into Selena. He did enough healing to stabilize everybody, and then once they switched out of Selena, the healing reduction dropped, and then he was able to really start capitalizing on it. And again, we're seeing, I love this, whenever Malady is up, making sure he's popping his strongest defensive and dampen harm, and making sure that he's able to spam everybody else up to clear Grievous quickly, is so ridiculously important whenever you're handling this dungeon, so that whenever you're spending mana, you're spending it in the most efficient way possible, and he just ooms right at the tail end of the fight, and then he's able to drink without too much problem.
Yeah, anytime you're finishing a boss fight with mana left over, that's a good sign that you need to be pulling bigger. You know, that,
no,
that mana just means that there was more that you could have done.
I'm so thirsty.
Here comes Complexity Limit. There with this massive courtyard pull. We got a Soul Charmer kind of free casting in the courtyard, but that is eventually going to come in as well, as Big Dumb Gaming are finishing off the boss. Ooh, but Complexity Limit, those explosives, one going off. There's the AoE from the Thorn Guard dying. It looks like they're going to be able to get through this pull with those two Death Knights just powering through on the damage side. BDG taking a little bit of a respite here to set up a more complicated pull.
It looks like they're doing some weird things, so I'm kind of curious how that's going to wrap up. But I love the patience that we just saw out of Twisted. He actually sat back and waited for an extra 5 seconds for everything to get coalesced, and then he was going to be able to start pumping a ton of healing with Way of the Crane. One of the things I see a lot of times is how aggressively people will say, oh, there's a pull, let me start immediately using it. But I love that patience to stabilize Max first, and then be able to go with a very large Way of the Crane that goes a very long distance in making sure you're able to stay consistent. But they snapped!
No, they've snapped onto the fountain, but the rest of the team is dead. Oh, and now we're snapping back off as Cynic gets uprooted off of the fountain. What is going on here on the side of Big Dumb Gaming? I believe that this is what the kids call a wipe. Kids,
You're not familiar?
They will be going back to the front of the dungeon. Meanwhile, Complexity Limit, after that big pull, they're taking a little bit of a breather here by killing Urgroth, Breaker of Heroes. Look where they're fighting it here. They're fighting it in this doorway. That allows them to line of sight the Dark Fury along the sides of the wall there. Very good way to optimize a little bit of extra damage. And the reason they went to do this obelisk right now is because it gives them time for those cooldowns to recover so that they can once again do another big pull as the next order of business. Max coming out of a different portal than everybody else. He is going to be running in, grabbing a bunch of trash, and they are now going to be going into Soulbound Goliath with a boatload of trash and Death Knight cooldowns at the ready here. Blood of the enemies will be going out, deaths and decays on the floor, and the mobs will be soon following thereafter.
There we go, and they do, again, they follow this more patient strategy we've seen previously, where they grab all the mobs, they build up stacks, they build up DPS, and then they just start chunking the boss's HP. So, again, I love the setup that they're having to these pulls, and while it takes a little bit of extra time, it helps them more consistently work through the execution of it. BDG's working to get back in the game as they're steadily chaining more mobs in. But we're going to have Way of the Crane falling off pretty soon for Beyblade here, and there's still a lot of trash left remaining, so they'll have to be on point with their kicks to start reducing some of the extra damage.
Yeah, these mobs can be quite deadly with those Infected Thorns casts. Luckily, they do have a Dispel for them in Beyblade, but... Oh, on the side of Complexity Limit, the boss brought into a fire.
Yeah, I hate this split up right now that we're having. Twisted's being chased by all of the mobs. If he got Soul Thorns on him, he would have been in catastrophic trouble. But he is able to get back into the group. He just got separated there, and when you have to deal with getting separated from your group, and you're having any of the souls from the fire chasing after you as a healer, it's a disastrous situation. He's pretty low on mana at this point, so he's got to be extremely careful with when he uses his Way of the Crane next.
Yeah, they are pulling a little bit more trash here in. Oh, Twisted getting silenced, though, as one of those Spellbind casts goes off.
He can still DPS.
Yeah, that is fine. They are going to get a little bit more count from doing this. This is a good way to increase the efficiency of the dungeon by a little bit. Meanwhile, BDG onto the same boss pull here. Now they've opened, so Complexity Limit have opened up a lead at this point as a result of BDG's wipe. They've also opened up a lead on the trash count department, which is more insidious, but absolutely relevant thing that will come back to bite BDG later.
Yep, and Max is just able to sit in here. He only had to clear one time, and he cleared it early, so I love that being able to see that. Might just jump away at like the last minute to make sure that he survives. There's the jump. He is corruption slowed. He's just trying to get away. Very well played by them, and I'm glad that they didn't have to have a second fire clear at that point as well. Twisted's dropping his Transcendence so that he will be able to stand up on the fountain when he needs to. So they'll probably have a very big pull come around with the Pallid Gorgers, so he'll be up onto the fountain after his Way of the Crane ends. So watching it right here, he's stabilizing Max, he's getting into position, line of sighting, hitting Essence Font onto himself for a bit of extra healing. Way of the Crane's going to get going in just a moment once he's comfortable with where Max's HP is at, and then he'll be able to pop Way of the Crane and really start pumping tons of healing and damage to the group. I guess he just didn't even bother with it.
Yeah, this might be the setup
They just
pull.
Destroyed. Yeah,
the next pull-in might be the entire Raw room. I think that is what's going to happen here. As you can see, the DKs here really didn't pop all of their stuff. Even though there were a lot of mobs in that hallway, there were a lot of maggots, which have fairly small amounts of health. So I think now they're going to be setting up for a really massive pull. Might even be onto Raw. In fact,
I was going to say, I think it's going to have to be.
Yeah.
It's weird that he ended up dropping his Transcend up onto the fountain if he wasn't intending to use it.
May have been an escape protocol.
Yeah, possibly. If he's worried about his resources, you know, if he was making sure, for example, Max wanted to save his shield wall, and he needed a kite at some point, then he'd have it as a backup. But huge pull coming into Rawl as all of the damage is going to be going off at this point. Love to see these Unholy DKs just spike like crazy as 2.5 million damage goes up on the side of I'm Fired Up as those mobs are getting absolutely decimated. And in just seconds, Rawl's at 75% HP, and the trash is just gone.
Yeah, those bursting swords just making short work of the entire trash room here. No affixes like Bolstering or Sanguine really getting in the way of the strategy here in Waycrest for us this week.
Very well played on the side of BDG. We do still see them clearing out the hallway and taking care of a lot of the little smaller mobs at this point. They gotta get a really big stun there, avoid some of the extra spit casts that are going off as Sin is picking up a couple stacks, but again, well played by them, but it doesn't seem like they're just having the strategies to go fast enough to start catching up to Complexity Limit, as boss is down to 35% on their side as they're pulling even more trash in from the kitchen.
Yeah, it's actually really important what happens on the side of BDG, because one of the reason they won the Freehold was not just that Complexity Limit wiped on the last boss, but BDG was already in the middle of the last boss pull when Complexity Limit wiped. If they are far enough behind where Complexity Limit has the opportunity to wipe and still get back to the boss before BDG has pulled it, that is going to be really, really bad news for BDG. So they need to keep within striking distance of Complexity Limit. They need to make sure that if Complexity Limit wipes, they can capitalize, because that is going to be their path to victory at this point.
That's right, last percentage is falling for Rawl the Gluttonous, and I didn't know that you were able to line of sight Urgroth the Breaker's Dark Fury. That was really cool what they were doing in the doorway there.
Yeah, that is something that we noticed in a previous MDI weekend a couple weekends ago. And absolutely excellent way to optimize just a tiny little bit more damage. Nothing these players enjoy more than finding a couple seconds in a dungeon here.
And new strategies that you can start pulling off on live as well. I mean, we've seen a number of times where, oh, that's a really cool strategy, but it requires all shadow melds. It requires, you know, all of the perfect gear, all the perfect resources at their disposal or something like that. So being able to have those little extra things that you can bring to the table are always so cool. As Plexi Limit's grabbing Samrak the Beckoner. They're grabbing the second of their obelisks mobs right now. So really only expecting 2 obelisk mobs on boss. Usually I thought we'd see 3.
Yeah, this may be a case of Complexity Limit deciding that, you know, with Grievous active, and maybe they're going to pull trash into the boss as well, that they don't want too much to be going on at the same time. It may also be, you know, as much as I was speculating about how Complexity Limit I didn't think would play a more conservative strategy, they may just be doing a more conservative strategy than they're potentially capable of, just to secure a victory here and not risk, you know, chain wiping to a difficult boss encounter.
It could be. I think one of the easiest things to have control over is definitely going to be choosing whether or not you want to pull an extra obelisk or something along those lines. So that makes sense. Probably going to be grabbing everything in with boss, I would assume, as everyone's getting prepped, topped off, and ready. As Max does grab everything, ends up grabbing the boss as well. And once again, they're really turning it up with these incredibly aggressive strategies on bosses, but I do, you know, now that we talked about it more, I do like that they kind of pump the brakes on the obelisk.
Hyper down on the side of BDG, and they do not have a res available. That is going to cost them a minute or so, given that Rawl is at full health here. And that's something that is not going to be good for BDG. They're losing even more time here, and they're getting into the range now where Complexity Limit may be able to wipe once or even twice safely and still win the map. You can see Max kind of kiting around a little bit from Lord Waycrest. What he's doing there is he just needs to create a little bit of time to let the Spell Reflect get back up before the Wasting Strike gets cast on him. So at the last minute, he's intervening away, or he's heroic leaping away to build just a little bit of extra time in there so that he can get that Spell Reflect.
Beyblade's going down, and so does Cinna, as BDG is experiencing a full wipe right now on Rawl. And absolute disaster scenario coming out on that one. And just those little things that start adding up when you start losing people, already burning battle reses early on. BDG's just been punched in the gut right now as 12 deaths are on the board for them. As Complexity Limit with just 1 is having Lady Waycrest getting activated through a very strong run at this point.
Yeah, once again,
oh,
Max
that was so cool. Did you see
away.
That?
Yep.
Twisted stood outside and was in a prime position for Max to get the intervene on him so he could more easily get away. It was just like you were talking about. Buy some extra time for his Spell Reflect to get back before the Wasting Strike.
And they're going to be dealing damage to these two enemies roughly
There it is again.
evenly. Yeah, Twisted gets out of there, gets in range of the Intervene as the Wasting Strike cast starts. Max going to kite for a little while here, intervenes again, and now his Spell Reflect will be available for that Wasting Strike, and that will chunk Lord Waycrest instead of Max.
Yeah, and it goes to show how well they're able to game Spell Reflect, too. They just focus Lady Waycrest down first, which is something very few groups ever end up doing, and they just said, all right, we're just going to let Spell Reflect do its thing.
Yeah, those sorts of minor optimizations, the way that they were able... I think he was able to Spell Reflect every Wasting Strike there, but he was alternating between double intervening and intervene Heroic Leaping away from the Wasting Strikes, and that allowed him to just reliably create enough distance to always get that Reflect. Very, very impressive play. You can see Atrocity now standing out with Cloak of Shadows as those Gloom Horrors will jump onto him. Ooh, Atrocity gets spiked pretty low, though, after the Cloak expires. He is going to be okay, though, and preserves the cheat death, so still in good shape. Twisted getting on top of some candles up here, and the candle spot here will prevent the enemies from jumping onto him.
So
but he's in the defiled ground, so he's gonna have to get out of there for now.
There's a couple candles in every single room now with the Awakened Affix going on, and these candles are actually pretty broken. You can stand on them to avoid any of the foul terrors that are coming out, the Gloom Horrors, I believe they're called, from jumping onto you. But you can also use them in a couple other dungeons, like Temple of Sethraliss. It's just an area of no path available. So any of the frogs in Temple of Sethraliss for the last boss, they can't get onto you if you're standing onto the candles. And I'm sure there's going to be some other cool strategies that we'll see from them in the future.
Yeah, complexity limit here looking so good. This is going to be a 15-minute Waycrest Manor coming out from them. So, we'll have to see if they end up having a way to speed this up even further against a team like Method and A. But you know what? This route looked reliable from them. It looked like there weren't too many pulls that were close to being wipes. And nothing really too dangerous happening for them. So, a very fast run, a very efficient run, and a very clean run from complexity limit that will lead to them reverse sweeping here and getting this 2-1 victory, advancing further into the upper bracket.
That's right, and they pulled through, and I think that they just did end up pumping the brakes on bringing that third obelisk in, but pulled through for them. They made sure they were able to seal that victory, and they'll be facing up against Ethical a little bit later.
Yeah, congratulations to those guys. And Dranos, you mentioned it a little bit just coming out of that game here. Jack as well, they were a little bit more conservative on those two obelisks. They did it for the first game, for that second game as well. They only managed to have two obelisks at that last boss, and that's more conservative. Is that